Hello, everybody. Um, Again, don't know what day it is in our Frankenstein fiasco, maybe. Um, yeah, I have no idea. But it is a day, and it's another day that we are living all together. So, today I'm going to be link couple petitions in the comment section, or not the comment section, I suppose I should have prepared and have them, like, ready to go to put into the actual comments, but I'll put them in the description section, for us to sign. I've looked them up. They're petitions that still need signatures. So, after this, if you just wanna hop on there, get in your petitions, and then expand and find other ways to help out, that would be very good. Uh, Thanks to everyone who watched yesterday. I was tired as hell, and I took, like, a 2-hour nap. It was delicious, and highly necessary. So, today marks the first day that I'm going to be doing reading some quotes from some anti-racist reading that I've been doing and educating myself. I'm going to be reading quotes until I finish this book. It's called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, and I've only read the introduction so far, but it's very, very good, uh, and has some really great, like, new ideas, I guess, for me. Like, honestly, I hadn't heard the term anti-racist before this whole thing. That was, like, the first new term that I was introduced to, because I'd heard, like, you're racist or you're not racist, but, like, this anti-racist is a very cool and new idea for me that I'm really excited to share. And then also, once I finish this book, and once I pass it around to my family who will hopefully want to read it, I'm going to send it to whoever wants it or go drop it off to whoever wants it on the, like, we'll have a little deal. Like, you have to finish it in, like, 20 days, and then I'll check in with you after 20 days, and you have to give it to, like, one of your friends after you finish doing that. And then hopefully, like, with that, like, thread of accountability, like, I'm gonna check in with you in 20 days, and you need to be like, giving it away or, like, keep going, just so, like, we can circulate this book. You're not late yet. I haven't started. I'm talking about this book right now, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Um, it's really cool. And anyways, I'm gonna be like start circulating it, and I have a couple other books that I'll read and share quotes for y'all with to think about and to I guess integrate into your daily lives alongside my regular reading of literature. So, with all that ado, I'd like to give you the first quote. And also, like, I want you to know that if I ever say anything like problematic, like, please, it's your prerogative to like tell me and be like, Sophie, you're being a dumbass. Don't say that. It's our responsibility to yell at each other. So help yell at me and I'll yell at you and we'll all yell at each other and it will create a better world. Or if you're like, I think it's like if you have a problem with me like reading out of this book that's not a racist problem, um, like let me know. And like obviously I'm very, very receptive to critiques and criticisms and big thoughts. So here is our first quote. I'm going to start my readings with a quote and I'm going to end it with a quote as well. And then it also keep me super accountable because y'all yelling at each other for good reasons indeed. Okay. So, and this book is just like laden with incredible quotes. So, all right. Here is my first quote. This is the consistent function of racist ideas and of any kind of bigotry more broadly, to manipulate us into seeing people as the problem instead of the policies that ensnare them. So there's some thoughts for you on, I guess, the origin, the seed of racism is like that people. Interesting indeed. I know, I love learning. Learning is so good. Okay, so with those thoughts, who? No, Michael. Somebody wants to give me a job selling cars, but Michael, I have 2 things on my LinkedIn profile. I don't think you want that. Sorry. Okay, that was totally beside the point. All right, so let's do some Frankenstein. Okie dokie okies, artichoke okies. Frankenstein, Volume 3, Chapter 2. London was our present point of view. We determined to remain several months in this wonderful and celebrated city. Clareville desired the intercourse of the men of genius and talent who flourished at this time, but this was with me a secondary object. I was principally occupied with the means of obtaining the information necessary for the completion of my promise, and quickly availed myself of the letters of introduction that I had brought with me, addressing to the most distinguished natural philosophers. If this journey had taken place during my days of study and happiness, it would have afforded me inexpressible pleasure. But a blight had come over my existence, and I only visited these people for the sake of the information they might give me on the subject in which my interest was so terribly profound. Company was irksome to me. When alone, I could fill my mind with the sights of heaven and earth. The voice of Henry soothed me, and I could thus cheat myself into a transitory peace. But busy, uninteresting, joyous faces brought back despair to my heart. I saw an insurmountable barrier placed between me and my fellow men. This barrier was sealed with the blood of William and Justine, and to reflect on the events connected with those names filled my soul with anguish. But in Clareville I saw the image of my former self. He was inquisitive and anxious to gain experience and instruction. The difference of manners which he observed was to him an inexhaustible source of instruction and amusement. He was forever busy, and the only check to his enjoyments was my sorrowful and dejected mien. I tried to conceal this as much as possible, that I might not debar him from the pleasures natural to one who was entertaining on a new scene of life, undisturbed by any care or bitter recollection. I often refused to accompany him, alleging another engagement, that I might remain alone. I now also began to collect the materials necessary for my new creation, and this was to me like the torture of single drops of water continually falling on the head. Every thought that was devoted to it was an extreme anguish, and every word that I spoke in allusion to it caused my lips to quiver and my heart to palpitate. After passing some months in London, we received a letter from a person in Scotland who had formerly been our visitor at Geneva. He mentioned the beauties of his native country and asked us if those were not sufficient allurements to induce us to prolong our journey as far north as Perth, where he resided. I just remembered really excitedly that I have a hot water heater now and I can make myself tea. I have to agree, Shiv. My breath caught. I got so excited by that. Oh God, where was I? Clareville eagerly desired to accept this invitation, and I, although I abhorred society, wished to view again mountains and streams and all the wondrous works with nature adorns her chosen dwelling places. We arrived in England at the beginning of October, and it was now February. We accordingly determined to commence our journey towards the north at the expiration of another month. In this expedition, we did not intend to follow the great road to Edinburgh, but to visit Windsor, Oxford, Matlock, and the Cumberland Lakes, resolving to arrive at the completion of this tour about the end of July. I packed my chemical instruments and the materials I had collected, resolving to finish my labors in some obscure nook in the northern highlands of Scotland. We quitted London on the 27th of March and remained a few days at Windsor, rambling in its beautiful forest. This was a new scene to us mountaineers. The majestic oaks, the quantity of game, and the herds of stately deer were all novelties to us. From thence we proceeded to Oxford. As we entered the city, our minds were filled with the remembrance of the events that had been transacted there more than a century and a half before. It was here that Charles I had collected his forces. This city had remained faithful to him, and after the whole nation had forsaken his cause, to join the standard of Parliament and liberty. The memory of that unfortunate king and his companions, the amiable Falkland, the insolent Gower, his queen, and son, gave a peculiar interest to every part of the city, which they might be supposed to have inhabited. The spirit of elder days found a dwelling here, and we delighted to trace its footsteps. What a sentence. The spirit of elder days found a dwelling here, and we delighted to trace its footsteps. Yum. These feelings had not found an imaginary gratification. The appearance of the city had yet in itself sufficient beauty to obtain our admiration. The colleges are ancient and picturesque. The streets are almost magnificent. The lovely Isis, which flows beside it through meadows of exquisite verdure, is spread forth into a placid expanse of waters, which reflects its majestic assemblage of towers and spires and domes, embosomed among aged trees. Sometimes I want to put the emphasis on the ed in this, like instead of aged. It's so much prettier. I enjoyed this scene, and yet my enjoyment was embittered both by the memory of the past and the anticipation of the future. I was formed for peaceful happiness. During my youthful days, discontent never visited my mind, and if I was ever overcome by ennui, the sight of what is beautiful in nature or the study of what is excellent and sublime in the productions of man could always interest my heart and communicate elasticity to my spirits. But I am a blasted tree. The bolt has entered my soul, and I felt then that I should survive to exhibit what I shall soon cease to be, a miserable spectacle of wrecked humanity, pitiable to others and abhorrent to myself. I love that, but I'm a blasted tree. What a phrase. We passed a considerable period at Oxford, rambling among its environs and endeavoring to identify every spot which might relate to the most animating epoch or epoch? Or epoch? Oh no, now I've confused myself. Where was I? Epoch. Okay. The most animating epoch of English history. Our little voyages of discovery were often prolonged by the successive objects that presented themselves. We visited the tomb of the illustrious Hampden, and the field on which that patriot fell. For a moment my soul was elevated from its debasing and miserable fears to contemplate the divine ideas of liberty and self-sacrifice, of which these sites were the monuments and the remembrancers. For an instant I dared to shake off my chains and look around me with a free and lofty spirit, but the iron had eaten into my flesh, and I sank again, trembling and hopeless, into my miserable self. We left Oxford with regret and proceeded to Matlock, which was our next place of rest. The country in the neighborhood of this village resembled, to a greater degree, the scenery of Switzerland, but everything is on a lower scale, and the green hills want the crown of distant white Alps, which always attend on the piny mountains of my native country. We visited the wondrous caves and the little cabinets of natural history, where the curiosities are disposed in the same manner as the collections at Cerveau and Chamonix. The later name made me tremble when pronounced by Henry, and I hastened to quit Matlock, with which that terrible scene was thus associated. I'm trying to find out if, like, knowing how to pronounce Timothée Chalamet's last name is going to help me pronounce Chamonix, but I don't think it will. But I couldn't spell either of them if I was to try. So, from Derby, still journeying northward, we passed 2 months in Cumberland and Westmoreland. I could now almost fancy myself among the Swiss mountains. Is this a book about humanity or a travel guide for Europe, Mary? I could now almost fancy myself. Oh shit, I already did that one. The little patches of snow which yet lingered on the northern sides of mountains, the lakes, and the dashing of the rocky streams were all familiar and dear sights to me. Here we also made some acquaintances who almost contrived to cheat me into happiness. The delight of Clairville was proportionably greater than mine. His mind expanded in the company of men of talent, and he found in his own nature greater capacities and resources than he could have imagined himself to have possessed while he associated with his inferiors. "I could pass my life here," said he to me, "and among these mountains I should scarcely regret Switzerland and the Rhine." But he found that a traveler's life is one that includes much pain amidst its enjoyments. His feelings are forever on the stretch, and when he begins to sink into repose, he finds himself obliged to quit that on which he rests in pleasure for something new, which again engages his attention, and which also he forsakes for other novelties. We had scarcely visited the various lakes of Cumberland and Westmoreland, and convinced an affection for some of the inhabitants, when the period of our appointment with our Scotch friend approached, and we left them to travel on. For my own part, I was not sorry. I had now neglected my promise for some time, and I feared the effects of the Damon's disappointment. He might remain in Switzerland and wreak his vengeance on my relatives. The idea pursued me and tormented me at every moment from which I might otherwise have snatched repose and peace. I waited for my letters with feverish impatience. If they were delayed, I was miserable and overcome by 1,000 fears. And when they arrived, I saw the superscription of Elizabeth or my father. I hardly dared to read and ascertain my fate. Sometimes I thought that the fiend followed me and might expedite my remissness by murdering my companion. When these thoughts possessed me, I would not quit Henry for a moment, but followed him as his shadow to protect him from some fancied rage of his destroyer. I felt as if I had committed some great crime, the consciousness of which haunted me. I was guiltless, but I had indeed drawn down a horrible curse upon my head, as mortal as that of crime. I visited Edinburgh with languid eyes and mind, and yet the city might have interested the most unfortunate being. Clerval did not like it so well as Oxford, for the antiquity of the latter city was more pleasing to him. But the beauty and regularity of the new town of Edinburgh, its romantic castle, and its environs, the most delightful in the world, Arthur's Seat, St. Bernard's Well, and the Pentland Hills, compensated him for the change and filled him with cheerfulness and admiration. But I was impatient to arrive at the termination of my journey. We left Edinburgh in a week, passing through Coupar, St. Andrews, and along the banks of the Tay to Perth, where our friend expected us. But I was in no mood to laugh and talk with strangers, or enter into their feelings or plans with the good humor expected from a guest, and accordingly I told Clerval that I wished to make the tour of Scotland alone. "Do you," said I, "enjoy yourself, and let this be our rendezvous. I may be absent a month or two, but do not interfere with my motions, I entreat you. Leave me to peace and solitude for a short time, and when I return, I hope it will be with a lighter heart and more congenial to your own temper." Frankenstein, so you told us that you were going to go study, but I don't feel like you've been studying at all. I feel like you've just been like taking a joyride with your boy around Europe. What happened? Henry wished to dissuade me, but seeing me bent on this plan, ceased to remonstrate. He entreated me to write often. "I had rather be with you," he said, "in your solitary rambles than with these Scotch people, whom I do not know. Hasten then, my dear friend, to return, that I may again feel myself somewhat at home, which I cannot do in your absence." Having parted from my friend, I determined to visit some remote spot of Scotland, and finish my work in solitude. I did not doubt that the monster followed me, and would discover himself to me when I should have finished, that he might receive his companion. With this resolution, I traversed the northern highlands, and fixed on one of the remotest of the Orkneys as the scene labors. It was a place fitted for such a work, being hardly more than a rock, whose high sides were continually beaten upon by the waves. The soil was barren, scarcely affording pasture for a few miserable cows, and oatmeal for its inhabitants, which consisted of 5 persons, whose gaunt and scraggy limbs gave tokens of their miserable fare. Vegetables and bread, when they indulged in such luxuries, and even fresh water, was to be procured from the main land, which was about 5 miles distant. On the whole island there were but 3 miserable huts, and one of these was vacant when I arrived. This I hired. It contained but 2 rooms, and these exhibited all the squalidness of the most miserable penury. The thatch had fallen in, the walls were unplastered, and the door was off its hinges. I ordered it to be repaired, bought some furniture, and took possession, an incident which would, doubtless, have occasioned some surprise, had not all the senses of the cottagers been benumbed by want and squalid poverty. As it was, I lived ungazed at and unmolested, hardly thanked for the pittance of food and clothes which I gave. So much does suffering blunt even the coarsest sensations of men. In this retreat I devoted the morning to labor, but in the evening, when the weather permitted, I walked on the stony beach of the sea to listen to the waves as they roared and dashed at my feet. It was a monotonous yet ever-changing scene. I thought of Switzerland. It was far different from this desolate and appalling landscape. Its hills are covered with vines, and its cottages are scattered thickly in the plains. Its fair lakes reflect a blue and gentle sky, and when troubled by the winds, their tumult. He's violating the Third Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Their tumult is but a play of the lively infant when compared to the roarings of the giant ocean. In this manner I distributed my occupations when I first arrived, but as I proceeded in my labor, it became every day more horrible and irksome to me. Sometimes I could not prevail on myself to enter my laboratory for several days, and at other times I toiled day and night in order to complete my work. It was indeed a filthy process in which I was engaged. During my first experiment, a kind of enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. My mind was intently fixed on the sequel of my labor, and my eyes were shut to the horror of my proceedings. But now I went to it in cold blood, and my heart often sickened at the work of my hands. Thus situated, employed in the most detestable occupation, immersed in a solitude where nothing could for an instant call my attention from the actual scene in which I was engaged, my spirits became unequal. I grew restless and nervous. Every moment I feared to meet my persecutor. Sometimes I sat with my eyes fixed on the ground, fearing to raise them lest they should encounter the object which I so much dreaded to behold. I feared to wander from the sight of my fellow creatures, lest when alone he should come to claim his companion. In the meantime, I worked on, and my labor was already considerably advanced. I looked towards its completion with a tremulous and eager hope, which I dared not trust myself to question, but which was intermixed with obscure forebodings of evil that made my heart sicken in my bosom. That's the end of the chapter. That's the end of the chapter for today. Okie dokios. Ooh, a long one, sort of, tomorrow. Oh, sorry, I'm still sleepy. I'm sleepy. Okay. Good chapter today. Frankenstein wasted all of his time running around England, and now he has to actually face up to his promise. And as usual, he's proving himself to be a weenie. Frankenweenie. The hit cinematic masterpiece, which I actually think was generally considered very good, and I'll probably have to rewatch. Okay, so before I read you your final quote, I will remind you, today I'm going to be putting some, I have to agree, motives are much better. Reanimating your dog is a lot better idea than anything that Frankenstein has done so far. Just going to remind you that I'm going to be putting some petitions in the description section, so if you are watching this at a later date, hopefully it'll be available. Didn't think ahead and didn't copy paste them already, so I could put them in this chat. That is my mistake. I will do it better tomorrow. So please sign those petitions and continue to do good work and stay active and informed and educated. So here is my final quote for you today. And of course, it's not my quote. It's a quote which I have chosen to read for you. Okay, so our final quote for today is, The good news is that racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be a racist one minute and anti-racist the next. What we say about race, what we do about race, in each moment determines what, not who, we are. So, much to think about. Here's our quote. I don't know. Okay. Thank you all for listening and tuning in. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Tomorrow is Tuesday, so I will be in at 1. And I will see you then. Stay safe, stay informed, and love you all. Okay, goodbye. Goodbye.